Welcome to PetroNoia, the podcast that cuts through the noise of the energy debate. Hosted by Dan Ramito, this show takes complex energy issues, strips away the agendas, and delivers clear fact-based insights. Whether you're an industry expert or simply looking for a balanced perspective, PetroNoia brings clarity to the conversation. Each episode, Dan breaks down key topics, from U.S. energy independence to global policy impacts, focusing on the facts rather than the rhetoric, helping listeners make sense of the energy landscape. This is PetroNoia, where we separate fact from fiction to fuel-informed discussions.
Welcome to PetroNoia. I'm your host, Dan Ramito. I am here with what y'all will understand is an amazing guest with an incredible background, Lindsey Merrill, now Lyndsey Feinberg. Congratulations.
Thank you.
2 months in, right? Married 2 months.
Going strong.
There we go. All right. So the interesting thing, we were connected because I actually spoke with your colleague, Eric Beltz, who is the CIO of Engine Number One. And then we were having, that's right. We were having our kind of prep conversation. You get on the line and start rattling off all this interesting stuff. And then I remember specifically, because I joke about it today, I'm like, Eric, I think I'm just going to have Lindsey on. And I was dead serious. So I'm thrilled. I want to thank you for the time. But before we get into like the nitty gritty stuff, can you just give the background? And once again, take as much time as you want, because, you know, as the audience will learn, your background is awesome.
Yeah, Dan, thank you so much for having me. It is truly an honor, and I'm so excited to be on PetroNoia with you. Eric is our president and COO of Engine Number One, and he covered a lot of the deal space and how we're building out the projects. And I'm really excited to focus on the policy space, the geopolitical space, what's happening in Washington, all the opportunities on the table for this administration, and how we can all work together to make sure America has the leading edge in energy, AI, and industry. By way of background, I just finished about 15 years in the U.S. federal government. I started at the Pentagon. I was working in weapons systems development programs. I got into vendor vetting and moved over to the Treasury Department, where I focused on the Middle East, more specifically the Gulf. And then I was the Treasury Department's financial attaché to the Gulf for 4 years. I lived in UAE and in Saudi Arabia during a very exciting time, during the reimposition of Iran sanctions in 2018-2019, during Saudi's G20 presidency. During COVID, I was also the director of the Terrorist Financing Targeting Center, located in Riyadh, but all GCC countries are members. And then once the Biden administration, I also helped negotiate the Abraham Accords.
Just that part.
Like my most favorite thing. And then after President Biden was elected, I went and worked at the National Security Council in Washington and kind of continued working on a lot of these initiatives with Gulf partners in the region. And so I hit 15 years. I left the administration before.
Which is like 40 years in normal people's years, right? Then you measure DC in dog years.
Yeah, I mean, I dye my hair, but yes, it's great. But I left the week before the election. I was going to move on and learn something new regardless of who won. I'm so passionate about my work with all administrations, and I didn't want to feel like I made the decision for anything other than my growth.
Yeah.
So I joined Engine Number One, and I focus a lot on our business development, government relations, strategic partnerships, capital formation, fundraising, and putting together some of these awesome projects so that we provide opportunities for growth in America, the reindustrialization and powering innovation.
I love it. Yeah, all the above, and we're going to dive into all that stuff. So you spend 15 years, for all intents and purposes, in a federal position. You have experience with the Middle East. You spent time in the Treasury, and then, you know, understandably so, you're like, I'm getting into the private sector. What made you go take your talents, so to speak, to Engine Number One? Like, what stood out about that?
Oh, that's easy. I was so excited. I'd known Chris James, our founder and CIO, for several years when I was in government. And what we do in government is so important. We help facilitate the introductions of private sector companies, and we get to party at the ribbon cutting, but we never get to see where the sausage is made and structuring the deals, building the deals, how it actually comes together. And that was just a huge gap working in the financial space. I really wanted to dive in and understand how this comes together. And engine number one is so creative and innovative and has so many really strategic partners. Our partnership with Chevron that we announced in January, our strategic partnership that we have with GE Vernova, we really bring together the top of the top, and then seeing how these critical and really powerful players work together both in the United States and around the world. I wanted to know, like, who's carrying, who's doing what, how much money, how much does this cost, and what is on the line for each of these companies. And so it's been a really fun peek behind the curtain, and I'm learning a ton.
Yeah, well, what's interesting, I think we're at a place now in the market where, generally speaking, the consensus has converged to like, hey, we need a lot of natural gas, and then that provides us a little bit of a bridge, for lack of a better word, towards, scaling nuclear. I do think people are more reasonable and pragmatic as it relates to wind and solar, but with your particular experience, the policy is something that just kind of gets sidelined, and that's probably the most important part. And we're seeing this play out in real time, right? You have the IRA, which we're like, well, this is permanent, and then turns out no, it's not. And then you have the big beautiful bill, and people are high-fiving, rightfully so in some cases. Like, I understand the intricacies and sort of the intensity of getting something of that magnitude passed. But then I think people just, for whatever reason, tend to forget that you have the 2026 midterms, which will largely determine, do we kind of reverse course, or is this more permanency? So would love to get your perspective on just how does this policy stuff work? Like, it's sort of nauseating just trying to figure out and connecting the dots. It's like that meme with Charlie from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where he hasn't slept in 7 days, and he's like on like 80 Adderall pills, and he's like freaking out. But how do you dumb that down for us?
I think there's a lot of emphasis that we need to put into our strategic partnerships, whether that's here in the United States, between both parties, and with our partners overseas. I think that the One Big Beautiful Bill addresses so much, and it could be very useful. And I also thought the IRA addressed a lot of what we needed to see in terms of energy as well. So I don't think that it's either going to be the IRA or One Big Beautiful Bill. I think each of them have a lot of positives, but I think that in order for America to be successful and to compete on the global stage, we talk so much about the great power competition.
Yeah.
It's got to be a blend of the two. We really need a bipartisan solution, in my opinion. And I know that's not a popular opinion right now because it just seems far off. But
yeah.
I mean, I really think if we're talking about building these large-scale power projects and these large-scale data centers and infrastructure to support both of them, that's tens of billions of dollars. And these timelines to build out these projects are 5 to 6 to 7 years, and that's longer than a presidential term. So if you want the private sector and industry to be building out what we need in order to make sure we meet the energy demand in a timely fashion, we have to have the regulation and the structure that's going to weather the storm, no matter who is in the White House.
Right.
And we need some market predictability, and that's something I wish the Hill and the executive branch could really come together and focus on.
There's this consensus that natural gas and nuclear, for that matter, need to lead the charge, and certainly there's a place for renewables. But on the policy side, we cannot get people to agree. So the frustrating part is like, natural gas, yes, nuclear, a little bit of wind, a little bit of solar, but the policy point just gets stuck in people's craw. So I know that you were talking about the bipartisan thing. Like, from your experience, like, how do you do that? Like, what do you have to do? What has to be implemented? Is it industry, like engine number one, basically setting the blueprint, or is it just a function of education? Like, what do we have to do to get this right?
It's a good question. I think the answer is yes to all of that, even though it doesn't fit. I think what we need to do is we need to look at the resources that we have right now today. The demand is growing exponentially. We need, 400 gigawatts in the next 5 years? I don't know. How are we going to provide that with wind and solar? And how are we going to do that with nuclear if we don't have SMRs to deploy right now? We need to be able to build out this capability. And we have to use gas. Gas is what we have. And, you know, I hope that we get to talk a lot about our Gulf partners in this conversation. But going back to COP28 in Dubai and in the UAE a couple of years ago, everyone in the industry and in the communique, we said we need to begin to transition away from oil and gas, but we will not be successful without oil and gas.
Right.
So I think similar to needing a bipartisan solution, is we need to find a healthy balance of how do we use the resources we have right now to be able to invest in new critical technologies and new energies and new energy solutions. And that includes wind and solar, that includes battery storage, that includes nuclear, that includes CCS. And there's a lot of our oil and gas companies are focusing on this, but it's not something that we can deploy immediately. So I just think we need to be realistic in our expectations of what we're able to offer customers.
Yeah, and then one of the more interesting things that I've heard, right, is that it's no longer necessarily just a business consideration. It's a national security consideration. And you bring up a really good point with what's going on in the Middle East. Traditionally, I think us in the States have this incorrect, by the way, stereotype that there's this contentious relationship with the Middle East. And certainly we don't see eye to eye on all issues. But maybe bring it back a step. I would love your overview on the Abraham Accords, what that achieved, and then how that plays into what we're trying to achieve with the energy policy today. Because I do think those things are connected at the hip.
Absolutely. I just want to say our partners in the Middle East, I don't think we have more strategic, more dedicated, more responsible, and more critical partners than we do our partners in the Gulf. And the Abraham Accords were historic for a number of reasons. Of course, public diplomatic ties between the state of Israel and the United Arab Emirates and the Kingdom of Bahrain. Those are achievements that I'm so happy I was able to support, and I'm so proud of them. I will just hold them dear for the rest of my life. And so much, no one wants to be known on the world stage for their security might, their defense, intelligence. Like, yes, we all want to be strong and be able to protect our populations and our assets, but at this point in time the world is changing. We are at an energy revolution, a technology transition, and that apex, there's a ton of opportunity there, and our partners in the Gulf are going to be eating our lunch. They want to be known on the world stage because of their economic might, what they can bring in terms of investments. They are the largest energy producers outside of us, and they're ahead of us in some of the energy transitions. I mean, look at what everything the UAE is doing with nuclear and with renewables.
Let's stop it. Like, what are they, give me an example, like what are they doing?
So with Masdar, Dr. Sultan, chairman of Masdar, they have the largest solar plants in the UAE. But that is something they invested in a long time ago, many years. I can't remember how many years. I would have to check. But because of the long planning and the strategic foresight they have, they began investing in their own disruption many years ago, so that when the last oil and gas well is tapped, they already have their new economy up and running, and there is a lag time. And I think that's something that we should be looking at, encouraging, and trying to model ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I also think in terms of AI, which I think is so much driving the energy conversation, our partners in the Gulf really want... back to the Abraham Accords.
Yeah.
The reason the Abraham Accords are successful are because most of the negotiations and the initial agreements were focused on economic, energy, technology, agriculture. A lot of it had to do with water desalination. I mean, the access to water is critical everywhere. So there was just the threads of the Abraham Accords wove through what is critical to having successful, productive, and powerful economies. And I think that will remain. And even in the last several years, when our partnerships were really tested after the horrific events of October 7th, the Abraham Accords maintained strong. And that is because of these economic agreements and the strong partnerships that have now been formed. And so as we're looking at building out the United States energy and AI and power infrastructures to make sure we maintain the technological edge, our partners really want to be investing with us. We have the number one markets. We have the best return. Everyone wants to invest in the United States. So I think that there are, if you'll allow me, I think there are four four critical areas that the United States and this administration in particular has a lot of opportunity to allow their investment from sovereign wealth funds.
Okay.
But there are some hurdles that we have to overcome. And everything
You read my mind. I was about to ask you, like, this sounds amazing, but there's got to be some sort of catch where we have to address or fix something. So let's hear it.
Oh, there's always a catch. And so, there are four. So CFIUS, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, it's mandated by Congress. We need to figure out what we're comfortable with foreign governments investing in here in the United States, both in what sectors and what percentages we're going to allow. Is it direct investment? Is it passive investment? Are they going to need to go through LPs? What does this look like? And in order for us to be able to unlock the tens of billions of dollars that we need for some of these projects, especially when some of the customers, like the AI labs, do not have credit support, and the U.S. government is not sure how to backstop credit support.
Right.
Having some of these sovereign wealth funds who are very technologically advanced and want to be a part of these investments, this could be a creative solution, but we need to be able to have government support unlocking the right of way for them through CFIUS.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds pretty complicated, right? Because are we going through this process of analyzing who and who should not be allowed to own farmland, for example? And, one of the primary considerations of data centers is not necessarily just the infrastructure, it's the land, right? This is a major real estate play. I saw something today, and I didn't dig into it too deep because it was literally just grazing before we were talking now, that one of the proposed data centers that Meta is talking about is roughly the size of Manhattan. Have you seen? Yeah. So, I mean, once again, like the real estate thing, I'm glad that you brought that up. Like, what is it called again? CFIUS?
CFIUS. Yeah. Don't read too much into what it sounds like, but it stands for the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. So it's an interagency committee of all United States agencies. So it's led by Treasury, DOD, DOE, Department of the Interior, State, Commerce, all the intel agencies. So anytime a private sector company wants to invest over a specific percentage threshold in a critical sector or industry, before they can pursue this investment, it has to be approved by CFIUS.
Okay.
To make sure that there are no national security triggers for these investments.
Got it.
So, and the thresholds, can be relatively low. Ultimately, though, the president has veto. So if CFIUS says no, but the president feels strongly, he could veto that decision.
Interesting.
But if we want to be having a well-functioning economy, like a normal day-to-day business operation, hopefully we won't need every single strategic investment to be on the president's desk, no matter who the president is.
Interesting. So CFIUS is an interagency entity that essentially dictates the terms for foreign investors to come in and allocate their capital. Is that the way to think about it?
Yes.
Okay. It sounds super complicated. What's the second hurdle? Hopefully it's a little bit easier.
Well, we'll see. The second hurdle is our export controls of chips. And this is run by the Department of Commerce.
Yep.
So this is, everyone wants to be building out their artificial intelligence capabilities, including us, but everyone around the world. People cannot be doing this without chips. And whether they're using this for training or inference, whatever they're using the chips for. And we need to I would say probably in 5 years, you're going to need AI just to be doing regular commerce and day-to-day purchases at point of sale and in grocery stores everywhere. This is going to be critical. So if we don't figure out what we're going to be allowing export of chips to other countries, in a way, we will be stunting their economies. And so if we're not allowing them to invest in our growth of AI and we're not exporting chips to allow in their growth of AI, how are we being a good partner? And if we can't show up for our partners, why wouldn't they turn elsewhere?
Right. But I mean, can I play devil's advocate real quick? Like, why wouldn't, I mean, if we have the most sophisticated chips, which we do, right? I've heard there's like these two avenues. NVIDIA is giving China, I guess, a version of their chip that is far less powerful. And then there's two schools of argument on that. It's like, well, if you make them dependent on the lesser powerful chips, you essentially box them in. But then if you give them the lesser powerful chips, that's sort of a jumpstart to them figuring out how to become more sophisticated. And then there's also, what's going on in Taiwan, and then do we reshore? And then if we do reshore, why are we reshoring in Arizona where there is no water? And because semiconductors is such a water intensive business, do you have a preference, or like if Lindsey, Merrill, now Lyndsey Feinberg was ruler for a day, do you have a preference on what's the more efficient route? Like what's the more efficient policy?
I'm of the mindset that whether we say we're going to allow this or not, people are going to figure out how to get it.
Yeah.
People are going to be getting these chips, whether they're from us on a permissive legal path, or they're going to be figuring out how to create this technology on their own, or they're going to, if it's a lesser technology, paying more money to buy more of them to make them more effective.
Right.
So whether or not we play this game, people are going to be able to get this capability.
Mm-hmm.
I think we just need to figure out how. And I think everything, like I said, comes with a trade-off. And the reason that it's called the Great Power Competition is there will be winners and there will be some losers.
Right.
And I think if we're not really wildly focused, passionately focused on how we make this work, we're going to find out some really creative ways that people found out how to go around us. And we're not going to like that.
Right. So, I mean, what's the timing on that? Like, I mean, this stuff that hurdle number 2 sounds like we have to figure this out within the next couple years, because AI is anticipated with the trajectory, even if it's half of what the trajectory says, that you still have to figure this out really, really quick. Is that possible from a policy standpoint, or like what?
I think it is very possible from a policy standpoint. I can say in the last administration, I was working very closely with a small group of folks, trying to figure out what the thresholds are and what this means. We had some very passionate people in these conversations, and some incredibly knowledgeable folks, very technical. And that's what we need. I am not a technical expert, but I am a relationship and a policy expert. So if we do not show up, we're, saying nothing and being absent is also a response.
Yeah.
I don't want to be in that camp. So I think in terms of CFIUS, I know these are ongoing conversations, but we just need to be able to say, this is our policy and this is how we're going to help. And the same thing for chips. This is what we're going to allow. And if you apply for X amount of NVIDIA chips, they're not going to need to go through this approval process. This will be normal day-to-day business. If you apply for this, higher amount, then we will need to review. But I think we need to come up with very clear, very concise guidelines that help for normal day-to-day business.
Mm-hmm. And then what's hurdle number 3?
Power.
I thought you were going to say something along those lines. Yeah, I mean, look, I fell out of my chair. I was joking. I'm like, I mean, engine number 1, right? The Exxon activist, and we know that it wasn't. There was a variety of reasons why engine number 1 went activist on Exxon, but all of a sudden gets played into the power game, right? That press release talked about the reindustrialization of the United States, which you are 100% on. With that, are you guys doing anything in terms of guiding policy with policymakers? And if so, like what are those conversations like?
Yeah, absolutely. We're playing the game. I mean, so my number 3 is power, and that's whether we have the conversation politically of, are we using oil and gas? Are we using renewables? Are we, what are we doing? And we, engine number 1, are offering an all the above solution. Our founder and CIO about 2 years ago had the foresight to see that AI is going to be the next big industrial boom. And what's going to be the bottleneck to AI? And he determined it to be power. And what's going to be the bottleneck for power? And that's going to be equipment. So our founder, Chris James, goes by CJ, went out and secured 7HA.02 gas-fired turbines from GE Vernova and created this partnership with Chevron, which was announced in January. And so we're building out power plants that will be co-located with industry manufacturing and could be data centers to offer a power solution. And each of these projects down the line could have the opportunity for wind, solar, battery, or CCS. Okay. Not at every site. It depends on which site they're going to be located. And that will be very customer driven as well, because it's also a bit costly. But so in order to build out these large scale projects with these opportunities and options for the renewable down the line, we do have to be working very closely with policymakers and regulators. There's several different hurdles that we have to meet. So one of my jobs here in Washington is to meet with all of the policymakers. And as we're trying to figure out how to maneuver this very complex energy space, how can we help unlock those builds? And how do we help not hold up the timelines? How do we not get held up by NEPA? How do we not get held up by these public comment periods? If we want to be seeing all this power generation and transmission coming online during President Trump's term, we need to make sure that we have advocates for us in the policymaking space, so that we're not getting stopped every time we're trying to apply for a permit or a clean air permit, or like there was a lot of talk this week in some of our meetings about species, making sure that we used Bugs Bunny as Bugs Bunny is not being harmed in our build out of power.
Have the evolution of those questions that you guys are addressing, are they becoming better questions where you're becoming more optimistic, or what's the nature of the questions that y'all are being asked when you're presenting this stuff?
I'm always optimistic. I think there's always a way to do this. But I'm actually very encouraged by the conversations that we've had at the White House and DOE this week. A lot of the questions were not, why do you want to do this? A lot of the questions were, where in this process are you being held up, and who do you speak to? To me, that tells me we have very thoughtful partners, because that's a tangible question that we can answer to, and there are very tangible next steps that won't take 6 months. And so so long as we keep up the dialogue and we work together. Every time I'm in a policymaker's office, I know that I know the least information. I don't know all the conversations that they're having and negotiating behind closed doors. I don't know what the holdups are. All I can do is say, this is the project that we can offer you in the next 3 years, and this is how we can really use your help to make sure we get this done. And one thing I learned at the Pentagon is, in God,
it's just that time at your Pentagon, right? Just
my time, when I grew up. Yeah, but on one of our boss's doors, it said, "In God we trust. All others must bring data."
Yeah.
If you're ever walking into a room, you can make the best argument you want, but if you're not coming with numbers of gigawatts, dollars invested, timelines, maps, you're not arming your policymakers with what they need. So that is the most critical part of it. And then when they're having their internal deliberations that we're never going to know, they have the data they need, and they have a racehorse also. If they want to say, like, I support this company and what they're doing and this project, it's the only thing I know that's going to come online before 2028, boom, then we've got our person.
No, that all makes sense. And then is that a segue? What is the fourth hurdle?
Permitting. So yeah.
Permitting reform. Yeah, I just don't, once again, talking with Tim Tarpley at EWTC, and then certainly listening to Eric and obviously almost everybody else, the permitting thing sounds like that is the bottleneck that is the most frustrating. But it sounds like you're optimistic on there. This is sort of the argument that I've been making to the policymakers that I've been talking to, is everyone universally agrees that data centers represent the future economic potential of the United States, certainly, probably for the world. Everyone acknowledges that it probably is an arms race with China. But what I don't think people understand is, like, data centers in particular are beginning to experience, and would love your feedback or perspective on this, some NIMBYism, right? You need a lot of land that's predominantly in rural areas. There's a lot of behind the meter and off the grid technologies taking place with the intent of someday in the not too distant future connecting that to the grid. The state of the grid is not great. I feel like I'm completely being Debbie Downer. I'm usually like the internal optimist, but for the sake of this conversation, I feel like I'm being a little bit negative. But
I'm here to
yeah, be my therapist. You're the shoulder I'll cry on. But from your perspective, given like your background and your connections in the United States, like, do you feel like the data center thing, like, it feels like a very much a honeymoon period, and then now all these things are beginning as this materializes, could potentially become a political hot button? Like, do you Is Dan the conspiracy theorist merging here, or is Dan the pragmatist making sense?
I mean, I think Dan's the realist. I think I actually see a huge opportunity here because for so long America's been outsourcing a lot of their manufacturing and what they need in order to make industry run. And some of these data centers, because of the national security pieces and the sensitive technologies, we need to have it be here in the United States, and we need to protect some of the more sensitive technologies, which is also why the chips conversation is so complicated. But these data centers, I think the numbers are you need about 1,000 acres for a gigawatt. And that's, think about all the jobs that would create as well. Not only construction jobs, but maintenance jobs, tech jobs, and a lot of these rural areas where that hasn't always been the case. And I see that as a positive, where it's going to be fostering a lot of economic development. It's going to be a bit of a challenge. I think one of the biggest, I should add to my list, number 5 you said was water. I think number 6 could be labor. There's not a lot of skilled labor. You need a lot of, building a data center and building a power plant is not as simple as some of what you see in some of these areas.
Right. I joke that you're just not going to go to Home Depot and buy some copper and 2x4s and like build the power plant. Like, it's a little bit more intricate than that.
Not at all. And Merrill Feinberg is not going to go build a desal plant, even though I know
You're not going to do that? Why not?
As much as I would love to help with that. So I see a huge amount of opportunity. And I think also for all those positive reasons, you're going to see policymakers and local representatives really supporting the build out of these data centers and power plants in their jurisdictions, because it's going to be good for their populations and going to be good for their economies.
So you're not like, I've spoken to some people where they think the tidal wave of AI is going to act like Skynet and T-1000 and just completely take over and sort of displace a disproportionate amount of people. I personally think like you've had all these sort of innovative, disruptive technologies, throughout the course of time, and we figured it out. Like, I could imagine the guy who had like a horse and buggy business back in the day, and then the car comes and he's like we're screwed. And it's like, no, like, we figured it out. Like, you sound more like me on the sense of like, hey, AI will in the end be much more accretive than destructive.
Well, and I think that in the beginning of this conversation, we talked about, is this an education problem? Is this a policy problem? I think this is an education opportunity. I think more people in the United States use AI than they realize. Every time you Google something, that is AI.
Right.
Every time you plug something in to your search engine, even track it if you're using WhatsApp, if you're using text message, that's all captured. So I think this is a huge opportunity to educate the American population on how much they use AI, why we need this power. Don't be alarmed if you're seeing these power centers built near your neighborhood. This is what it's for. And, maybe educating more on the great power competition and what that means if the United States is not able to protect their sensitive technologies, what that means for each individual's security and the security of their personal information.
No, we're kindred spirits. Like, the other thing, would love your take on this, and you're gonna roll your eyes, because everyone rolls their eyes. Okay. We did this thing in like 2019, 2020, a little bit after COVID, where the whole world was going net zero. Like, that was the rage. Like, we are going net zero, like hell or high water, we are going net zero. Then 2022, 2023 hits. Everyone finds out that you can make really cool illustrations on ChatGPT, and then generative AI sort of just takes off, and we're here today. And you have this competing campaign with, we are going net zero versus, no, we need AI. We need to win this AI arms race, in many ways for a variety of reasons that we've highlighted, but just from the sheer amount of power that AI requires. The odds of any economy organically going net zero is probably zero, right? If we're being honest. Now, there will be financial instruments that come onto the market, namely with the voluntary carbon credit market, that will facilitate that. And we can have that conversation later, but would love your perspective on how you are observing the discussions with the, hey, we have to go net zero crowd, with the, hey, we need to win the AI race crowd. Because those two competing I guess, philosophies. First of all, I don't think they're aligned. You can prove me wrong. But they're in direct competition with one another. So from policy perspectives and then just your own experience, like how is that balance playing out?
I mean, I also think that's sounds a little bit to me like the IRA versus the one big beautiful bill. And that sounded to me a lot like the bipartisan conversation. I mean, I think we're not going to win the race if we're going to be focused on only being net zero, because we don't have those resources right now. We don't have them built out. We don't have the infrastructure. We have to come together and find the happy median of how can we meet this demand today, and how can we use that demand and build options on top of it that will be very influential and productive in the energy transition. And
Oh, go on. Sorry.
no, and I don't see those conversations happening with both parties at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in many ways, like, once again, I guess I am generalizing it, net zero tends to align more with parts of the very more progressive left's argument, and they're unrelenting on that. And then AI, for the most part, I think it's politically agnostic. Everybody uses it. But in terms of like the economic component, purely looking at it from the financial, that tends to be predominantly more right. And like, I struggle with trying to figure out how those two groups are going to like hold hands, let alone just come to an agreement. Like, do you think that has to happen, or will like the more, I guess, reasonable, more realist middle sort of take control and they'll figure it out, and then the outliers will just remain the outliers?
Well, I think my hope is that we'll remove some of the rhetoric from these conversations and we'll focus the most on the facts.
Yeah.
We do at some point need to reach net zero. Climate change is happening. I mean, temperatures are rising, water is depleting, polar bears are suffering. There are some serious climate change impacts that are happening, and we need to be able to pull out the facts from that conversation and use them when we're also talking about how do we use oil and gas minimally and to the certain extent that we need it to meet demand, and then build on top of that. Like, if we can pull some of the carbon credits and some of the major incentives from the IRA and marry them with some of the business and commercial aspects of the one big beautiful bill, I think that would be something that would be longstanding and something that would give the market the comfort to invest tens of billions of dollars and build these power plants that they don't have to worry about it being overturned in 3 years or 2 years or once ever it gets approved, no matter who's in the White House.
Yeah, the optimist in me looks at sort of like what was cut in the IRA, and certainly there's a variety of things that were cut. But two things that really stand out to me, they didn't cut 45Q, like they changed it a little bit, and they extended a lifeline with hydrogen. And once again, it's not that I dislike hydrogen. I struggle to understand how we're going to make it economically feasible. It's really, really expensive, and transporting it is really, really difficult, namely because you can't use existing infrastructure. And my thing is, like, if you're going to build out infrastructure, you might as well build out natural gas infrastructure and extend pipelines for natural gas, because that's what we need. And then I was having a conversation with somebody. Have you heard the term? Because I had not heard it. Transition washing.
No.
I was accused of transition washing, like all this stupid washing stuff. Everything is like washing these days. But the argument that this person was making was that, natural gas, and to some extent, 45Q, and I don't know why 45Q, frankly, was lumped in there. Maybe he was getting pretty heated, and so maybe it was a slip. But there's this, what he would put, this growing transition washing, where we're not transitioning from anything, like we're not moving towards a net zero. And my thing to him was, well, there's a limited amount of money, there's a finite amount of cash. You just can't go around investing in everything because it feels good or you think it's going to impact the environment, positively. You have to achieve this ROI. That way you have cash flow. So where I'm going with this is from a government perspective, and I'm asking you to put on like your crystal ball. Let's say the Democrats retake the 26 midterms. How does this play out? Do we revert back and we're just playing this pendulum game, or is it more sensible policy? Like, what do you think happens?
That's a good question. In, so taking this back just a little bit in the conversation, talking about how hydrogen, talking about 45Q, when there was so much pressure in the last 4 years on being net zero, on being completely renewable, completely green, clean energy. And there was, because the timelines that everyone set on ourselves were so short, everyone was working so quickly, and I don't know that we had all the data we needed to make sound decisions. And even when I was in the White House, people were coming and telling us we're building these, gas pipelines because eventually you can use them for hydrogen. And then other people would come and brief us and be like, you cannot use the gas pipelines for hydrogen. You have to use, and we're sitting, I'm, not an energy expert, but trying to figure out how to help with the policy piece of this and just not sure, where we're looking. I think if we're able to use this time of the transition to just sit down and do the work and come up with what the solutions are going to be and then shape policy around those solutions. But that's also going to require people to put some of the ego and the emotion aside and leave the rhetoric. And that's just not how Washington works.
So give me how does it work? Like I know it's a word of trade-offs. I keep asking that question, but to get stuff done in this, like, what is going to have to happen? Like, is it sort of like someone like Manchin really stepping up and being like, hey, like, we have to sort of take one for the team here? Or is it just, Republicans have to sweep the House and the Senate and that's the only way things are going to get done? Or like, what does that scenario look like where stuff just gets done?
I think that, big strategic picture here, I think that private sector needs to be empowered to come up with a lot of these commercial solutions and be able to, because the government is too big, too bureaucratic, too slow. The private sector has the capital and they can move quickly, and they also have the human capital and the expertise. Yes. So if the government can create a structure that empowers private sector to really put their heads down and come up with these creative solutions, and then present them to the government and say, this is what we need from you in order to unlock these power plants, these data centers, this infrastructure, then that would be a real public-private partnership that puts American industry first. And whether that comes from, I think that can come from both Republicans and from Democrats, because there are jurisdictions and opportunities for all of these projects in red and blue states.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with that. And that sort of leads me to like the other thing. So we talk about U.S. policy quite a bit, but up until a couple of years ago, international policy very much influenced at least energy policy in the States. You had like COP, you have Paris Agreement, you have all the stuff going on in Europe. Do you see
Paris Agreement? Are we back?
I don't know. We do, we don't. We have parts of it. But my point is, I know that you spent time, the National Security Council, which you modestly downplayed. I actually think that's the coolest part. Would love to hear some awesome stories. Like Lindsey just sitting around doing code breaking exercises, and listening on conversations. You don't have to expand. But like we go through this exercise where like COP, for example, is like these international pledges, and everyone's like, yeah, that sounds great. And then no one's really held accountable. Do you see those types of summits changing and becoming more focused on more like just achievable goals, or like how are they evolving?
Unfortunately, I think that those kinds of forums are incredibly important, and climate change and achieving net zero is not something that one specific country can do on their own. China is operating purely on coal, and unfortunately, as the winds blow, California, even down into Arizona, into Maricopa County, is getting the residue from their coal, and that is not helping the United States meet their goals. And so, in the last administration, there was a big focus on how can like-minded partners, the United States, Europe, whomever it might be, is putting pressure on the countries to make significant changes. And I don't think that's going to happen unless we are even a part of those conversations. And right now, I don't think that the effects and impacts of of the coal blowing into the United States is grave enough for the average American citizen to realize that it's coming from China. But it is. And if we're not showing up to the conversation, I think that that's a really big missed opportunity, because this is something that we're all going to have to address collectively.
Right. So we have a couple minutes left, and I'm going to put you on the spot. I would want 3 reasonable forecasts, like in the next 2 years, right? Where are we at on a policy perspective? And I use 2 years on purpose, right? Because November 26th is right around the corner. In terms of the natural gas to nuclear bridge, are we talking like 10 years, like 15 years? Because I think that's a real hard thing, and we'll take these individually. And then the third thing I would love your perspective on is, the direction that we are now. Like, it sounds, and I agree with this, that the government has to be much more of a referee than player. Like, how does that evolve over the next 5 years? So question number one, in terms of like Lyndsey, Merrill, Feinberg's crystal ball, like where are we at in 2 years?
In 2 years, let's see. So it's 2025, will be 2027. We're still going to be on nat gas. Nuclear is not supposed to be coming online for another. I mean, I think what they're saying now is 2030 or 32.
32, and there's no way you think to speed that up?
I don't see that happening. I know Secretary Wright is very passionate about this and really keen to push this forward, but I just, we've been talking about SMRs and nuclear for so long, and every time we talk about it, the date seems to slide to the right. So I want to be optimistic. I think that would be fantastic, but I don't know that we'll be seeing it in the next 2 years.
And is that purely because of permanent reform, or there's more education to be needed, or like there's just so much stuff that needs to be unraveled?
I think honestly, I think it is just a technological development. I think building this out and having it come online. I know there's a decent amount of money behind it. So I just think it's taking longer than everything takes longer than you think it is. Everything gets dragged out. Everyone says 2 weeks, it becomes 2 months, and then all of a sudden you're 12 months later and it's the same conversation. And I think it will come online. And you had initially said it will happen in the next 2 years. No, but I do hope that it stays on track and we see it in 2030 or 2032.
I mean, in that respect, 2030 is right around the corner. I mean, that's 5 years from now, but I just get so frustrated. It's like the analogy that I make is, you have someone who's just out of shape and you're like, all right, hey, no problem. Like, just eat right, go to the gym, give it a good year and you'll be fine. And they're like, I don't want to do that. Then you're going to stay out of shape. You're like, but I want to stay out of shape. I'm like, I'm literally telling you what you have to do and you don't want to do it. And they're like, yeah, I know. And that back and forth is like sort of the analogy that I make with the whole nuclear thing.
But on that process that requires that person to admit there's something wrong. Right. It's really hard to get people to do that. No one wants to call their baby ugly. Also for the customers, it's very expensive. Someone would really have to put their neck out there and be like, I'm going all nuclear and I'm spending this much money, which I think we've seen some companies do.
Nuclear is just this different animal where, like, I don't envision anyone leveraging their balance sheet to the extent of, tens of billions of dollars for a payback period of like 30, 40, maybe even 50 years. And I'm sort of going against Dan's golden financial rules. Like, I really don't like subsidies. I don't like government subsidies, but like, I don't envision a scenario where government cannot subsidize nuclear development. I just don't see that. I mean, am I speaking gibberish? Do you agree with me, or like, where would you push back?
I think that we need nuclear eventually, and so in order for us, similar to how I feel about government greasing the skids and unlocking for private, I think that nuclear is included in that, and not only for civil nuclear, but of course, defense nuclear, right? And I think it's really important for the U.S. government to be a player in that space. I think it's strategically important, but I also think it's commercially important to have that backstop.
Yeah. And so on the other forecasts that I asked, I'm almost positive you're going to say the U.S. is going to win the AI arms race.
Of course I'm going to say
It are, because I agree with you.
there is no one else.
We are going to win that. I have no doubt in my mind. But in terms of just this geopolitical dynamic, like how do you see policymakers react to that? You know, number one, will policymakers figure out a way to balance net zero with power demand increase, or will that just remain contentious and we just sort of deal with that? Like, how do you think that plays out?
I think we have to find a balance. Our partners around the world are moving ahead very much with how are we going to advance our economies through the energy transition and into renewables, wind, solar, CCS. I mean, we cannot be left behind. We have got to figure out how to have that conversation too. And I think in order for us to win, we will figure out where the balance comes from and the perfect trade-off for us to be successful in maintaining the leading edge. A lot of the technologies our partners are using are ours. So we just need to learn how to figure out how to deploy those technologies domestically.
Right. Like, that's the biggest thing. It's like, it's not like we don't know how to do this stuff. We gave it to them.
Right.
So,
well, we ordered with them.
Yeah. Speaking my language. Final question. Like, I'm going through this, and once again, I'm going to make you blush a little bit. So you've been the special assistant to the president on strategic Middle East initiatives.
Yep.
You've been the chief of staff and senior advisor for energy investment. I believe that was for also the Middle East, correct?
I've always had the Middle East kind of in my portfolio.
Right.
It's my passion.
You've been the director. I love this title, by the way. The director for transnational affairs and regional security. You were the financial attaché to Saudi Arabia and Bahrain for the department. I think I said that, for the Department of Treasury. Within the context of what you are comfortable and allowed to divulge, give me some of the coolest stories or some of the coolest experiences you had out of all those positions.
You know, I'll get personal with you because that's just who I am. I grew up in Northern California. My family is Jewish. I have family living in Israel. I was very young. I was in middle school when 9/11 happened, but that was very formative for me. It was scary and I didn't understand it. And I became very passionate about understanding why someone would want to do this to people they don't know, and how relationships drive a lot of what happens. And so when I always knew I wanted to focus on government, international politics, national security. I went to school outside DC and studied exactly that. I interned, at the Knesset in Israel during my undergrad, and I was there for the Hezbollah prisoner swap in 2008, which was really hard for me to see.
Right.
But something I found that always mattered to people was feeling heard and being able to relate to someone else. So I wanted to go out there and learn as much as I possibly could, and to really learn what everyone was trying to do. Whether it was furthering their economies, whether it was connecting to another country, whether, combating terrorism, there's something everyone's trying to do, and everyone can relate to something within that sector. And it was really important for me to go and learn and go into the Middle East and introduce myself and work together. And I have met some of my very best friends that I will have for the rest of my life in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, in Qatar. And I worked really closely with the Saudi Arabia State Security Presidency, their intelligence services.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you a little story. So it was in my third year serving in Saudi Arabia, and one of my closest counterparts, his wife was pregnant with their third baby. And Mohammed Mabruk, that's so exciting, your third baby. He had 2 sons already. I was like, are you hopeful for a daughter? And he's like, oh, I would love a daughter, And I said, oh, if she's having a daughter, what would you name her? And he said, I would name her Dina. It means a gift from God. And I said, that's so beautiful. Muhammad, I'm Jewish, and my Hebrew name is Adina. And okay. I'm sitting in a dark, windowless room with my colleague from the Saudi intelligence services and sharing this with him. And his response was, mashallah, that means you're my daughter from another lifetime.
Ooh, Well, that's cool.
And so there is something that, we are so connected. Our cultures are so similar to the Gulf. Our values, while sometimes there are differences, at our core, there's always the threads of commonalities run deep and are woven very much through each of our policies, our everything about. So if you can find that connectivity, you're going to find ways that we can succeed together. But that takes time and that takes work and that takes a lot of effort. So we need to be showing up and investing that time and investing that effort. And we will have good solutions that last for a long time that make sure there's prosperity and peace for all of us.
I love it. I mean, that's the perfect note to end on. Lyndsey, I can't thank you enough for joining us. Like, I have 4 pages of notes. This was great. Thank you so much. Clearly engine number 1 is doing great things. I know that you are, instrumental in what they're trying to achieve. So looking forward to future conversations, and thank you again for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dan.
Appreciate it.